Welcome to the Save Childhood podcast with Jennifer McCarville. Because childhood has changed, but children have not.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Save Childhood podcast.
I'm Jennifer McCarville.
And I'm Nicole Dugan. And today we are talking about a topic that often stirs up strong feelings for parents and teachers: bullying. Now, that word does carry a lot of weight, and for good reason, but
not all behavior is bullying. Not all the hard moments between children are bullying. And I think that we do hear a lot, so-and-so's being bullied, which of course that's a word that we all pay attention to, right? So-and-so's being bullied, and what we find, whether it's coming from teachers or parents, is when you really do the work of digging deeper, which is always important when you're working with children. When you really do that, it's sometimes hard moments, and that's part of growing up. Dealing with things like rejection, I don't want you to play with me, those things happen as part of growing up.
Right.
So what we want to know is the difference. So in order to understand the difference, we need to know what bullying is.
Yeah. I looked up the definition at stopbullying.gov, and it says that bullying is intentional, repeated aggressive behavior that involves a real or perceived imbalance of power. This could be physical strength, social standing, or knowledge of something that makes another child vulnerable. So there are three key ingredients of bullying.
Those are the three right there. You said them. It's intentional harm, right? The goal is intentional harm, a repetition of the behavior. That's really key also. Repetition and a power imbalance. So, and also it's important that power imbalance can be perceived. It's not actually that someone has power over another, but the child who is feeling those big feelings about how they're being treated or what's happening believes emotionally that there is a power imbalance, that person who's making them feel that way has power over them, whether they do or not. So those three ingredients are really important as we're trying to navigate and assess, is a child being bullied? So we want to stand close by, especially in the school environment when a parent expresses that concern. We want to stand close by in the areas where those children are interacting, and we want to watch for their intentional behaviors against another and the pattern. That's so important. It's not a one-off, we had a disagreement, or he said I can't play with him, or
2 days that week one's feelings were hurt. That's not necessarily bullying.
Right. I mean, and hurt feelings and challenging social interactions are part of growing up.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
And that's the learning.
It is the learning. It's the social emotional learning of the early childhood years, right? And of course, social emotional learning doesn't stop after third grade. It's just that's the main area of growth. Through third grade. So of course there's still academic growth and creative expansion of growth and growth in all areas. But the social emotional piece of growing, they're just learning so much, and this is the window to really help them navigate their feelings, situations with others, etc.
Right. So there are types of bullying.
Yeah.
Physical bullying.
Physical. Yep. There are 4 types.
Mm-hmm. Verbal.
Yes.
Social/relational bullying, and then cyberbullying.
Right. And let me just tell you, cyberbullying right there, make a decision as a school to be screen free, make a decision as a parent before your child ever is asking not to put them on screens until, at least much older, 5th grade, I would say. A phone possibly, but a dumb phone, and no social media until they're 14 at least. So you actually have the power. And I talk to so many parents on the cyberbullying, even just the issues with the phones and the computer and things with when they're interacting with other people, who say, I really wish I'd never started, because stopping can be hard, but quit giving up your power. Don't make it so hard. Just decide and do it. But the best thing for those of you who haven't ventured into that yet, make a decision as the grown-ups in your household that you're just not going to go there. Do your research, listen to other podcasts about that, and it's all very clear. So cyberbullying, we can eliminate a lot of that, but it also is a larger topic for where social media is usually a huge place where that happens. And so monitoring social media for your children is a full-time job.
Yeah.
So avoid it. If you don't have time for another full-time job, then there's your answer. We don't do that in our house. So that's one right there that could really get out of control.
Yeah.
So, but the physical bullying, that's a very clear, and it's not an accidental physical interaction, and it's not, but it is a consistent, and it's not even a one-time, I'm really frustrated and I'm having big feelings,
Right.
and I lost control and I hit you. Those things need to be tended to, but that's not bullying if there's not a pattern and it's not intentional.
Right.
I'm going after you every day for more, a few days or what have you. We had a child in the preschool one year who he was so angry with this other child who got water on his shoe. And he really it was a complete accident. We have water everywhere in our outdoor classrooms. The child was getting water out of one of the water tubs, and the other child had his shoe there. His foot was under there and it got water on it. And the child whose shoe got wet really didn't like that feeling. And for months, he was determined that the child who got water on him did it on purpose and was a bad kid. And I use quotation marks with bad because there are no bad kids. But in this little boy's mind, he felt like he was bullied by that child. And so now, on the flip side of that, every day for months, this little guy came to school in his mind thinking, how am I going to get back at that kid? So one teacher was always available and ready to know that kid needed support because he could not reconcile it in his mind. No matter how many conversations, etc., outside of the conflict that we may have mentioned it, we had to just be really accepting of the fact that he just wasn't there yet. Now, he wasn't a bully. He was 3,
right,
maybe 4, but he wasn't a bully. He just, in his mind, had been done wrong, and he needed to right it. And then all of a sudden, one day, it was like his brain clicked. He realized, oh, that's never happened again. He's not a bad kid, air quotes. He's not after me, and I actually can move past this emotionally. So that's an extreme example where actually the child who was the one who got water on his shoe could have been declared a bully because every day he came to school and he was going for that kid who got water on his shoe. So, those categories and those labels, while we're not opposed entirely to labeling things, I'm not implying that, we have to be so careful and understand their development and understand where they're coming from emotionally, why they have to have that vendetta in that situation. But physical, obviously, that's a little clearer. That one is a little bit easier to determine.
Yeah, and so for the purpose of not watering down the word bullying by using it so often with children, in front of children, let's dig a little deeper about what the difference is between childhood conflict and bullying,
right,
so that we can understand it and best support children and parents and teachers alike.
And it really is a crucial distinction between those two things, right? That's why we're here today, right? So typical conflict between children, which we see all the time, every day, and that is the learning ground, right? We don't expect children to spend their time together and not have conflict. We expect children, when they have conflict, to be able to get the most support and learning out of those situations so they can become emotionally competent, so they can, develop that emotional intelligence, so they can develop those social skills and that regulation that they need, right? So you have 2 children who are arguing over a piece of material, etc. Maybe they're pulling back and forth because they both want to use the tire in the outdoor classroom for something, or etc. That's typical conflict. That's just typical conflict. So, there's a different way to support that. And we have information about how to handle that too. So a child saying something really harsh or unkind in the moment, Because here's the challenge, I think, about to me, the biggest challenge about bullying and determining what is and what isn't is the social and emotional piece of bullying, because right, there are 4 types and that's one of them, right? And so the social and relational part, when I take something that you've done and it deeply hurts me, and it's just a pattern of your behavior that actually is okay, but for me it really feels hurtful and intentional and directed at me in a negative way, you may not have the intention of hurting me in that way. However, I perceive it that way. So we have a complex situation to deal with. Some children are extremely egocentric, right? And they're just going about doing their thing. And sometimes they are insensitive and, unkind in a one-off or, a kind of situation, but they're not bullying. So right. That's a really hard thing to decipher. So that emotional piece, when you say something mean in the moment or you're upset, yeah, someone else could perceive it. But that doesn't mean that it's bullying. So another thing that's really typical for children and is not bullying is exclusion from play, saying, oh, I don't want you to play with us.
Right.
And, people handle that in different ways. There are some people who have a you can't say you can't play rule. We don't have that. The way we approach that is if children are playing and they're collaborating on something and they've done something, whether it's, they've designed a game to play or they're building something together and they're collaborating and it's very, intricate and exciting and other children come in and they want to join, we help children learn you need to give them a role in the play. We're at school, we can play together. If they want to join and add to the richness of that experience, that's great. But if they want to come in and change it, that's a different story. Because when you have children who are working really hard on something and they're concentrating and it matters to them, and another child comes in and starts, oh, that looks so cool, but I have an idea of how to do it better, so I'm going to change all of your ideas, or I want to do this, that's a fine line. And so you have to watch that carefully. And our position on that is we want to respect the children who are engaged in deep work.
Right.
And we want to help them learn how to incorporate a new player without compromising what they're doing. And that new player has to be able to meld into what's happening. So, that can be a little bit tricky, but it's perfectly normal. You can't play with us. I don't want you to play with us. And sometimes think about they are whole people. So we have to think about it as if we were really engaged in an activity or experience and someone came up who was a colleague or that we knew, but not necessarily a friend, because they're not friends just because they're in the classroom together. But if someone came up to us and they were like, oh, I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to start taking over what you're cooking, or I want to do it with you, but I'm going to tell you what you're doing wrong and we're going to do it my way. Or your golf game, someone comes in and they're like, okay, now it's my turn. And you're like, whoa, we've been playing this game and it's not your turn. You're not part of this game. So we have to consider that they're whole people. So when it comes to accusations of bullying, we have to really be thoughtful, just like anything else. But this is such a huge topic.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of times, I'm not going to lie, and I know that people don't want to hear the hard things, but the hard thing is children come home, their feelings are hurt, they're upset. Their parents often will say, oh, that kid's bullying you. Mm. And then the child comes back to school and they're like, he's bullying me, she's a bully. And it's not that easy, right? So when you overuse an accusation like that, a criticism, whatever you want to call it, it loses power.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that we're seeing in education. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like what we're seeing is so many more people saying, the children are being bullied, whether it's teachers we work with in trainings or, we've had situations, even working with parents over the years where it's because it comes from a place of love. They love their children. They're not with them. They worry. So when someone's unkind to your child, that's like a piece of your heart. And you're like, whoa, he's bullying you.
Yeah.
But we want to be so careful as adults because we want bullying to carry the weight it needs to carry when it's actually happening.
Right. And we don't want to dilute the seriousness of when it's actually happening.
Absolutely.
By using it all the time.
Absolutely. Very, very true.
And in the examples that you were sharing and in the examples of regular, normal conflict, in those moments, we're having the ability to teach the children problem-solving strategies, emotional regulation, different communication skills so that they can stand up for themselves, know the best way to handle it when something like that happens.
Absolutely. Those are the learning opportunities, and of course that they're getting the support they need, and also that we aren't, watch out here, we're not over supporting them. We've got to trust them as they get older to try it out.
Yeah.
They've got to be able to figure it out. So we also want to give children a little space, like let's see if they do figure that out. It may not be textbook, it may not be exactly, but as long as it seems fair enough by our perspective, that there's not an imbalance of power and the children are content with a solution, we need to give them the opportunity to try and solve it, because the whole goal is that we're letting out that rope. You know, they're attached to us, they're tethered to us, and we want to slowly release the tether and allow them to fly. That's the goal. So we want to give them space, especially as, well, even from the time they're 3, you know, we want to step back, and we know their personalities, and we know when they're younger, and no matter their age, when we need to be close by or step in quicker, depending on who the child is, and, you know, etc. But they're going to build those social competencies, in the trenches. That's really the only way we learn anything, is through our own experiences.
Yeah.
And that's what we want. So we want to give them those opportunities, because we also in the other times are giving them those supports.
Right.
The children are very capable. They're very, very capable. And, you know, we would definitely want to remember that. So, but not all conflict is bullying. So when it is bullying, you're looking at things like, I can't say that enough. There is a pattern. It is repetitive. It is intentional against one child all the time, right? But again, we get into that social piece where I feel like I'm being bullied because my friend now is playing with someone else and I'm left out, or they're telling me, no, we're playing. And on their part, it seems very innocent because they're learning to be thoughtful of other people. But for the child who's left out, it's real and it's hurtful. But you know, here's an important opportunity we have for those children who tend to be a little quieter, a little more reserved. They tend not to push back to make their way. And we watch for that very intentionally too, because it's our job to help those children find their voice. So just as much as on one extreme, you have the child who is bold and loud and you can't play here and I'm doing this and go away, you have the opposite extreme of the child who's just a little bit more kind of quiet, kind of more of the observer, and maybe doesn't have that kind of voice to say, you know what? I don't want to play with you. I'm okay. We want to encourage them to have self-confidence and not, we don't want anybody to be a victim, but in a real sense. But we also want to teach those children who need a voice where to find it. They've got to learn how to get the things they need as well. And that's a really overlooked, in my professional experience, that is an overlooked need in the classroom and even at home. That child who is just quietly taking in whatever hard knocks come their way because they don't know how to say, like, you know what, it really hurts my feelings when you say that, and I'm not going to play with you anymore.
Yeah.
I'm going to go somewhere else because I deserve to be treated kindly.
Yeah, or even just to stand up and say, well, that's not true about me.
Not
and
true.
I know in my heart it's not.
That's so important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is not true about me. And I know it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And encouraging them with that language as the adult who gets to walk alongside them. It's such a gift to be able to walk alongside any child or any person in our lives. And we want to encourage each other and equip these children, both to, on the one end of the spectrum, the louder, more boisterous, more like the one who doesn't really still notice anybody's around when they're 7 and 8 years old, and you're like, hey, woo, Mr. Excitability, hey, just full of life and boisterous and all of those things. Like, pause just a minute, like, they're right here and they're asking you if they can play, and you need to answer them. And then sometimes they'll say no, and we say, well, let's talk about why not. And the child just needs to think it through, because very often when we do that, they're like, oh, well, actually, you can play. I think it's human nature that often our response to something is no before yes. And that's why say yes is one of our 14 tenets, because we just tend to be wired. When we weren't planning on something, etc., we typically go, oh no, can't do that. We're not doing that. But yet, why can't we?
Right.
So we want to help the children realize, wait a minute, why can't they play? Why can't they join you? Oh, they actually can.
Actually, and other times though, they sometimes have really good reasons. Like last time they knocked it all over on purpose, or they felt like it was on purpose, or so. Yeah, you do have to get to the thing before the thing.
And then when that happens, what you say is, oh, you know what? I hear him saying that he doesn't want you to build with him because the last time he was doing this, you came to build and you knocked down everything he had worked on. And then that child has the opportunity to be cognizant of that, to say, oh, I didn't mean to, or I'm going to be careful this time. And they may still knock it down again, but hopefully, the intention there would be that it would be accidental.
Right.
It wouldn't be, I'm coming in here to destroy what you've made.
Right. So let's talk about what parents and teachers can do. I mean, clearly you want parents and teachers working together to help the children always.
We do that. Yeah.
So some open-ended questions that parents or teachers could ask children when they come home or come to school or confide in you about how they're feeling. What are some things that you could say?
Well, first thing you should do is breathe and underreact. That's something that we say, it's one of our mantras here. You want to listen. Mm-hmm. You really want to actively listen. Don't add information. You don't even need to ask questions at first, but if you do and when you do, because it is appropriate, make sure you're not giving them ideas. Like I said before, sometimes we'll be like, oh, well, that kid's bullying you. That's not okay. I'm going to talk to the teacher, which you absolutely should talk to the teacher. But when you're talking to the child, you want to help them get a bigger picture, because children are born egocentric. It's a survival method. It's a survival strategy that is inborn in all of us. It's just innate. And so they think about themselves first. And you know what? Most adults do that too.
Right.
Right? I mean, I know when I'm talking to people, when I'm doing trainings, even and something's going to change, the first thing almost all of us think is, how does that change impact me? And so we have to train ourselves to be less egocentric than that. We have to train ourselves to say, oh, I understand that's good for the bigger picture. We still need to know how it impacts us because we're part of the picture.
Right.
Right? And we are going to oftentimes have to shift. But it is a natural thing for them to only see it through their lens. So we want to broaden what they're seeing, ask some questions, but still believe them. It's just a sticky situation there. Don't talk about it with the teacher in front of the child. Send them an email so you can communicate through email as you're figuring things out. If you need to have a face-to-face conference, the teacher should make time for that. But email them, because if the children are around, then your child could misconstrue what they're hearing. Another child might hear a word here or there. A parent might walk by. It's just respectful to maintain that confidentiality. So we want to email the teacher and say, heads up, can you give me some more details? I want to put it on your radar. This is what they're saying. They're really heartbroken. They're frightened. And then, when that happens for us, one of the most often the strategy we use is when the children come back to school, we sit down and talk to them. We have a conversation with them, depending on what's going on. And we try to get to the bottom of it. Our equally used strategy, I would say, I guess, is observe deeply for the next day or two. If it's news to you, especially if you haven't noticed there's some grumbling and conflict between these kiddos, then you want to definitely be intentionally observing and seeing, right? So you're looking for patterns. So you want to listen, breathe and underreact, listen, hear them out, ask them some open-ended questions like, well, what happened next? Did you get some help from the teacher? You could say this. You can give them some of those kinds of things if you feel like you must, and sometimes children need that. And then you want to look for patterns. Remember, if it's just happened once or twice, it's not bullying.
Right. And what about, I'm thinking of a few different scenarios in my teaching career where two strong personalities collide often, and so it would be a pattern because it is often, true, I guess, but it's but they're also drawn to each other because they're
Yeah.
trying to figure out the other's personalities, and that's not necessarily bullying either.
No, because there's no imbalance of power.
Right. They're
It's
learning
a pretty
their way through it.
equal, like,
Mhm.
you know, those frenemies, right?
Right.
Like, we really are intrigued by each other. You have strengths I don't have. I love how you think about this, but I don't like how you execute it, so we're going to argue all the time. You know, these kinds of things. And that's going to happen in our lifetimes. And, you know, navigating that is really beneficial for those types of personalities, right? So, but there's no imbalance of power.
Okay.
So that's the key to that situation. It's not bullying, but man, it's constant conflict and it's not fun for anyone.
Right.
Well, it's less fun for the adults. A lot of times the children are okay, but we have to teach them to deal with that together because they're bringing an equal amount of challenges to those situations. So a lot of that needs to be like, you know, as long as they're not being physical,
Right.
right? A lot of that needs to be you guys, you girls, you guys, you people need to work that out.
Yeah.
I'm right here, but you guys are going to need to work that out.
Yeah.
So,
and we're here to help.
yeah. And
Mhm.
it's really important what other things we can do. It's really, really important to model empathy, model kindness, model boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like we have just a steadfast rule. It is not okay to hurt people because they have inherent value. So you don't have to be friends, but it's not okay to hurt them physically or verbally, etc. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen
Right.
because that's part of growing up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when children start to figure out they have power and influence over other people, they try it out.
Right. That's normal.
That's normal. That's normal. And so, again, not bullying, just what it is, right? So you also want to help, and we talked about this a little bit, but help your child find the words to stand up for themselves. That's one very important component of these situations. And again, make sure you're partnering with the teacher, because while we know that not all behavior is bullying, in fact, there's a lot of behavior in a healthy environment for children. If your children are in a healthy school environment, if you are providing a healthy classroom environment for children, then it's very rare in those early years that it is bullying.
Yeah.
So, but when it is, like, we want it to carry the weight that it needs to carry. And then we deal with actual bullying in very different ways. I mean, it is a absolute no deal. Talk to the other parent of the child who's, you know, having those behaviors. Of course, in a healthy classroom environment, you've probably already talked to those parents about some of these behavior patterns that child has, and it's okay. No bad kids.
Right.
Kids who need our support. So, but you want to talk to those parents, you want to deal with that, you know, it depends on your school and their policies, but that's why we want bullying to carry the weight it needs to carry. So we want to make sure we can identify it, we can understand the difference between typical conflict, growing up kind of conflict, and crossing that line that is that's a no deal for us.
Right. So not all conflict is bullying, but bullying is a real thing.
Absolutely.
And we're going to take this information and hopefully move forward with a better understanding.
I sure hope so, because it's good for all of us, children and adults. And again, being what children need takes a lot of reflection. These kinds of conversations and thinking like, okay, before we throw those accusations and labels and such around, what is that? What is bullying?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we understand what the definition of bullying, you know, we started with defining that. And so we're operating from that definition with these parameters, you know, these are the things that it is, these are the types of bullying, and we need to address it accordingly, because it is a deal breaker when it actually is happening.
Yeah.
And that means children aren't coming to school if that's the case, or etc. So it depends is a very powerful approach to things.
Right.
It respects everyone when we enter into these situations with, we're not sure what we're going to do yet, because it depends on all of the factors, and we're going to be the detectives who figure that out.
Right. And sometimes it depends on the thing before the thing, which is in a future podcast episode that we'll be doing very soon.
Yeah.
So tune into that one, the thing before the thing. But that wraps it up for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe, comment, and share with others who are passionate about saving childhood.
Yeah, and also check out our 14 tenets of saving childhood, which are the framework for the things that we do to preserve childhood for all children. If you're an educator or a parent who really wants to go deeper, we are having our second Save Childhood conference in November of 2025. Early bird registration is open now. We're excited about that. Think about joining us because we'll have a day and a half of learning and growing together and visiting the Marvelously Made School campus and getting to spend time with our incredible educators. So it's a unique conference, but it's one you want to be at.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Let's keep the conversation going on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and new episodes launch every Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Central Time on
6 a.m.
Spotify and Apple.
And on YouTube.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks so much, guys. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. To learn more and join the movement, go to savechildhood.org.